Snape, who had been amazed at both the head boy's skill and his willingness to stand up to Potter's gang on his behalf, quickly shook his head. "No, Mr. Longbottom, I thank you for your intervention." To his embarrassment, the Slytherin sniffled. Longbottom studied the young Slytherin for a few seconds. Then, to Snape's surprise, he sat down on the ground next to the other boy. "I'm sorry I didn't get here faster, but I did arrive in time to see that business with Evans. That was rough." Severus tried to summon a sneer or an insult, but was simply too broken down. Longbottom looked off into the distance silently for a few seconds.
"I interned with the DMLE last summer.
He said, changing the subject.
Got to take a class on improving my observational skills and learning to read social cues. It was very interesting. I got an O.
He turned back to the confused Snape.
I couldn't help but notice that when you called Evans a mudblood, you weren't even looking at her. You weren't looking at Potter or his gang either. You were looking off to the side, over to where Mulciber, Wilkes, and Rosier were watching, approvingly.
Snape remained silent. Frank hesitated for a second and then went on.
I imagine it's pretty hard for you in Slytherin at times. Just being a half-blood in Slytherin is hard enough, but to have a Muggle born as your best friend. And worse, one you obviously have a crush on.
Snape's breath caught in his throat.
And then, in front of everyone, she saves you from Potter's gang in front of all your Slytherin peers. I imagine that would have made things intolerable if you just let it go.
Severus looked down at the ground, unable to meet Longbottom's eyes. He wanted to bluster and deny, but found that he couldn't, not while under the gaze of someone who seemed to understand him without hating him. Unable to speak, he simply nodded at Frank's deductions.
Do you think she'll forgive you?
He asked softly. Snape hesitated.
I will go to her this summer and try to explain that in a single instant I had to choose between insulting my best friend or confirming to my housemates that I was a blood traitor fit to be hexed on an hourly basis for the next 2 years. But no, I do not think she will forgive me. Is there anything I can do, Severus?
Snape looked up sharply at Longbottom's presumption of familiarity, but the look in his eyes stopped the Slytherin from saying something offensive. It wasn't the pity he'd been expecting. It was kindness, which was a wholly different thing that Snape had only rarely experienced from others. He sighed.
If it wouldn't be too much trouble, I'd appreciate it if you'd make a big show of docking 5 points or so for calling Lily a mudblood. Perhaps mention to one of the Slytherin prefects how disgusted you are with my vile bigotry.
Frank laughed. Sure thing.
Thank you, Frank.
Now Snape pinched the bridge of his nose between his fingers and then looked up at Neville and Harry. He sighed in resignation and then began to speak.
The first thing you must understand is that when I was young and foolish, I was very young and foolish. The second thing you must understand that the early days of the last Wizarding War were a time of great confusion. While it was generally understood that the Dark Lord and his followers were motivated by a hatred of Muggle-borns, a sizable portion of the wizarding populace failed to appreciate just how violent and destructive they were. Likewise, at least in the early days, a great many people, including myself, failed to appreciate that the Dark Lord was genuinely a Dark Lord, and not just some jumped-up agitator the government wished to discredit. The wizarding wireless was still somewhat new, and in any case, owned and controlled by the Ministry, just like the Daily Prophet, our only major newspaper. And during that era, the Ministry strongly supported new rights and protections for Muggle-borns and Muggles to a degree that even moderate witches and wizards found troubling. To make a long story short, a great many of my friends and peers from my school days believed that the worst accusations against the Dark Lord and his movement were propaganda meant to discredit him, that the atrocities the Death Eaters supposedly performed were fabrications, or worse, actual atrocities performed by Muggle-borns, for which Voldemort and his followers were framed. That is not an uncommon tactic during times of civil insurrection. I believe the Muggles refer to it as false flag operations. In fact, even the term Death Eaters was first used in a Daily Prophet editorial as an insult against the organization formerly known as
The Knights of Walpurgis.
an insult the Dark Lord eventually co-opted and turned to his own political uses. After graduating Hogwarts in 1978, I remained in contact with former Slytherin friends who joined the Dark Lord's inner circle. I returned to England in January of 1980 after obtaining my potions mastery in Italy. The skills I had obtained were some that would be extremely useful to the Death Eater movement, and they wished to recruit me. And while I had little use for their larger political agenda, a family matter that arose around that time made their offer attractive. You see, I am a half-blood.
Both Harry and Neville were startled by his blunt admission.
My father was a muggle, but my mother was a witch from the now extinct noble house of Prince. She was expelled from the family for marrying my father, a foolish and short-sighted decision by my grandfather as he had no other surviving heirs. Thus, when he died in 1979, the House of Prince was extinguished. However, my friends assured me that if I could prove my worth to the Dark Lord, he would reward me when he took power by legislatively reversing my mother's expulsion, thereby allowing me to claim the Prince seat and assets. It was against this backdrop that on a cold January day in 1980, I found myself in the Hog's Head Inn in Hogsmeade. I had learned that Albus Dumbledore was meeting with an applicant for the recently vacated divination instructor's position, and I had hoped to meet with him myself and present my credentials for the position of potions instructor, as I had heard rumors that Horace Slughorn was considering retirement. While waiting for Dumbledore to come out of the meeting room, I suddenly heard the woman inside cry out the beginnings of a prophecy, the same prophecy which the Dark Lord related to both of you. The owner of the bar caught me eavesdropping and, assuming I was deliberately spying on the headmaster, threw me out. Although I knew there was more to the prophecy than what I'd heard, I believed, correctly, that relating what I did know to the Dark Lord would win me a place in his inner circle, and eventually, I hoped, the Prince's inheritance.
He hesitated.
It goes without saying that when I met with the Dark Lord, I had no idea that either of your mothers was with child.
But you did know you were sending you-know-who after a child, though, right?
Asked Neville in a tight voice.
Even if it hadn't been either of us, you were telling you-know-who to kill a child.
Severus chuckled bitterly.
As I said, Mr. Longbottom, when I was young and foolish, I was very young and very foolish. In all honesty, when I revealed the partial prophecy to the Dark Lord, I had not considered for 1 second the possibility that it referred to an infant.
The two looked up at him in surprise.
What?
Asked Harry incredulously. He shrugged.
I never took divination, and in my hubris, I applied a layman's analysis to what I'd heard. Consider the words of the prophecy that you already know, Mr. Potter. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches.
The word approaches, in my mind, clearly referred to someone who was some distance away but drawing nearer. It is not a word that I would have ever used to describe a child in utero, whose birth was still over 7 months away. The phrase, born as the 7th month dies, obviously indicated a late July birth date, but did not, in and of itself, imply that said birth was yet to come. As for the middle line, born to those who have thrice defied him, well, defy
Is a rather vague term. Certainly, Lily Potter's defiance consisted mainly of publicly condemning the violence of the Death Eaters and, of course, marrying the pureblood James Potter despite her muggle-born status. In any case, the Dark Lord was known to have spent decades traveling the world in his studies of the dark arts. I assumed that in his travels, he had crossed wands with a wizarding couple 3 times, foreign auras perhaps, and that he killed one or both of them during their 3rd encounter. The subject of the prophecy, then, was most likely their son or daughter who, having reached adulthood, now pursued the Dark Lord to seek vengeance. So no, the possibility of the prophecy referring to an unborn child simply did not occur to me, until after I was initiated into the Death Eaters, and the Dark Lord announced his plans to completely